Clean environment could become a UN human right. Not so fast, says US and Britain. Now, this is a funny thing as we talk about rights an awful lot here. I'm very, very big on rights, but governments and other, authoritative bodies are very selective on what rights they want to push for and which ones they want to enforce. And there is a very, very good reason for that, which I'll get into this. Geneva, October the 5th. Britain and the United States are among a few countries withholding support for a proposal brought at the United Nations that would recognise access to a safe and healthy environment as a human right. The reason for that is that would be like, I understand the, not wanting to push for it, but that is an almost impossible right to enforce. How would you enforce that? Well, they know why. Climate change and all that other stuff. Prompting criticism that they are undermining their own pledges ahead of the Glasgow Climate Conference. Diplomats say that the Geneva based Human Rights Council is expected to adopt the resolution later this week, even if an opposing country calls a vote, as supporters are numerous and include Costa Rica, the Maldives, and Switzerland. If adopted, environmental defenders say it will pressure countries to join the more than 100 nations that already recognise a legal right to healthy surroundings. And while the resolution would not be binding, lawyers say it will shape norms and help campaigners develop arguments in climate cases. And that is the important part here, right? And I'll remind myself at the end of this video to talk about why this specific right is being pushed for and others are being left to the wayside. The World Health Organization estimates that some 13.7 million deaths, and as we all know, they are an extraordinarily trustworthy organization, a year, or around 24.3% of the total, are due to environmental risks such as air pollution and chemical exposure. At national level, this right has been shown to empower people, particularly those most vulnerable to environmental damage or climate change, to drive change and hold governments to account. I absolutely agree. We absolutely should be able to hold governments to account. But it seems to be the focus is only in this particular instance. And again, we'll get into it later. Said Mark Lamillan of Universal Rights Group think tank. This might explain why some governments like the US, Russia, and UK do not like it. Observers following the discussions have criticised the stance of London as host of the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow next month. Climate leadership must be reflected across diplomacy commitments. There is more to it than hosting the COP, said Sebastian Duke, bloody Europeans, campaign manager on human rights and climate change at the Centre for International Environmental Law. The UK must join the overwhelming majority of countries in support of this resolution so as to avoid undermining its position, he added. Yasmin Ahmed, UK Director of Human Rights Watch, said she hopes Britain comes to its senses because the resolution is supported by many countries more vulnerable to climate change, the very countries that Prime Minister Boris Johnson pledged to support. The UK's leadership on climate action is well documented, and our efforts are currently focused on a successful COP26 in Glasgow, a spokesperson for the UK mission in Geneva said. That's great. I hope China's going to be there. I hope India's going to be there. I hope Russia's going to be there. They'll be there, won't they? Yeah, they'll be there. They'll be there, and they'll reduce their carbon emissions and fight climate change. Yeah, I'm sure they'll be. Whilst we have legal concerns about recognising a right to a safe and healthy environment in this way, we continue to engage constructively with the main authors of this resolution at the Human Rights Council. The US mission did not respond to a request for comment. In discussion about the resolution, Washington also referred to legal concerns as well as worries that recognising new rights could dilute traditional civil and political rights, according to sources following the talks. The United States is not currently a council member, but is vying for a seat and can still join debates as an observer. While the lack of US support clashes with President Joe Biden administration's promise to play a global leadership role on climate change, Washington has historically been hesitant to add new rights and tends to avoid legally binding treaties that could be difficult to ratify. Brazil and Russia are opposed to the resolution, which they see needs amending. Of course, Russia is. Sources following the talks say, and challenge to the status quo. For David Boyd, UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment, the UN proposal, which was first conceived of in the 1990s, is long overdue. The evidence is overwhelming that these environmental challenges are directly affecting people's enjoyment of fundamental human rights. I'm happy that you care so deeply about fundamental human rights. I also care very deeply about fundamental basic human rights, but you seem really focused on this one. again later. There are definitely countries that have a deep-rooted interest in maintaining the status quo, and this is a challenge to them, he added, without naming them. Past UN resolutions, such as this one in 2010 on the right to water and sanitation, have prompted countries like Tunisia to pass legislation enshrining it in domestic law. Aspects of the historic 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights later became law via an international treaty. Globally, the number of climate-related litigation cases has soared in the past few years, and more are invoking human rights to support their arguments. Remo Klinger, lawyer for the environmental non-profit Deutsche fucking Schmergenbergen, fucking stupid German names, said the resolution represents an example of soft law which could be used to make better cases. The group organised a successful legal case that in April forced Germany to tighten its climate policies. And Dennis van Berkel, legal counsel of the Urgenda Foundation, which landmark climate case against the Dutch government in 2019, said the resolution could help courts interpret the right in future cases. Although it is enshrined in many constitutions, courts do not have a huge amount of experience in how to apply this right, he said. The Council's 47 members are also set to decide this week on a parallel resolution brought by the European Union and others and supported by Britain that would create a new special rapporteur on climate change. Top UN rights official Michelle Bachelet opened the council session in September by calling environmental threats the single greatest challenge to human rights of our era. Climate change is about nature. Where do our rights come from again? Reporting by, blah, 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 blah. Right, okay. Now, obviously these groups seem very, very dead set on human rights, to the point where they're going to create new ones. They want to create these whole brand new rights. Right now, you would think that a lot of their attention would be placed on the already existing codified rights that are being infringed on constantly by the governments, but they don't care about them. They want to create a new right. Now, this is a bit where, hear me out. This new right is for the government, for the governments, right? And I can explain why. Authoritarians, basically, the purpose of the government, as well as a lot of libertarians believe, is its most basic function: protection of your rights. Basically, if someone assaults you or steals your property or attacks you or anything, then that person should be arrested. If they destroy your property, if they violate any of your property rights, your natural rights, etc., etc., that is where the government should step in, right? Infrastructure and all that other stuff, a lot of who build the roads, Pizza Hut, Amazon, they'll build the fucking roads. But basically, you get the point. That is what a lot of libertarians believe the government should only be. It is there to protect your rights. Now, that does involve the government violating other people's rights. So, for example, grabbing the guy and throwing him in the back of the van does kind of violate his rights, but, the whole agreement is because he violated the rights of another, he forfeits his own rights. Right, that's the way it works. Now, whenever you pass a law like this, where guaranteeing a person to a right to a healthy and safety surroundings, now, in order for you to actually enforce that, you would need to do some extreme stuff, like, for example, having complete absolute control over all industries in the country, as well as what other people can and cannot do with their property. For example, one of the little soft versions is, in Britain, you're not allowed to burn garbage. You're not allowed to burn rubbish in your backyard. You're not allowed to do it. However, when you live out in the country, everyone fucking does it. Everyone fucking does it. It's good when you live somewhere where there's no cops. So basically, a lot of people still do that, but the government then has the power to come into that person and go, nope, you're not allowed to burn your rubbish, you're not allowed to do that because it creates an unhealthy and unsafe environment. Instead, you must, by law, pay us, the government, money to come and collect all of your rubbish. And even though you would be able to get rid of it immediately if you burned it, we'll pick it up once every 3 weeks. Maybe, if we feel like it. But basically, with this right, the government's like, well, we're going to need to control these companies. We're going to be able to regulate what people can and cannot do with their properties. We're going to be able to basically complete control over so many industries, so many companies. Everyone's going to be under tight lock and key, all because of government regulation. But this time the government can say, what? We're protecting human rights. Well, You asked us to protect rights. It's what we're supposed to do. The government's so clever. It's so they're so fucking clever. But yeah, that is why they're doing that now. It does come whenever the rights come in, and the government's job is to protect rights. Yes, that does involve the government controlling some things that other people cannot do. For example, and I feel that this is quite right. If I walk up to you in the street and I punch you in the face for literally no reason, then yes, I should be arrested, and yes, I should be charged for that. That is the government doing what it's supposed to do. Now, I have been thrown in the back of a van, and I'll probably be locked in a cell and everything, and my rights are being violated that whole time. However, I violated your rights, therefore I forgo mine. Right, and that's normal, that's the natural way of things. However, the government might put things in place to prevent me from assaulting other people. And that is, the government does have to infringe rights to protect rights. That's the happy little weird balance, but it only does it when some people infringe the rights of others. Now, that will mean that industries, lots and lots of industries, will be constantly violating rights because of pollution and because of this and because of that. Oh, we'll need to go in and regulate the absolute shit out of them. But don't worry, it's okay when we do it this time because it's to protect rights. That is why there's such a big push for this particular right when it comes to climate change and like things like speech. The government doesn't give a fuck about, because speech rights does not give the government any more power. I mean, speech rights is inaction by the government, right? The only other time is someone, like, if you're giving a speech and someone comes up and punches you and shit like that, then yeah, they'll get arrested for assault. But speech, if the government goes, everyone can say what they want, that doesn't give the government more power. It doesn't give the government any more power at all. But this particular right, well, that would give the government a lot of power. Which is why this is the one that they're actually pushing for.